to, so we're just going to roll on. This is how it works tonight, and I'm really pleased to see all of you here. And since all of you are sitting, I'm going to do the same thing. And my hip people down in Bismarck will appreciate that. My name is Steve Slocum again, and you will be hearing tonight from a proponent advocating the passage of this North Dakota constitutional measure. You will also hear from two others tonight advocating for the measure's failure. Both sides of this issue had the opportunity to have two representatives on stage tonight. One side opted to, the other not to. I don't foresee any downside other than one side may leave with a sore jaw and a hoarse throat. But other than that, everybody's going to leave thinking that this was nothing but a fair and open discussion. Okay, we'll get moving here. Now let me introduce those on stage tonight, speaking for their respective positions. Opposing the passage of North Dakota Measure 4, I'd have him stand up quickly, Mr. Robert Harms, and you can call him Bob. Bob is a longtime political activist, former North Dakota Republican Party chairman, legal counsels to Governor Schaefer and Hoeven, and he is the husband who still can't believe Sherry said yes. I want you to please welcome Mr. Robert Harms. Opposing the measure as well is Mr. Rod Backman. Mr. Backman is a ag land manager, he's a retired CPA, and a certified financial planner. He also enjoyed his position in the state as North Dakota's Office of Management and Budget Director for 10 years. My guess would be he's definitely a numbers guy. So please welcome Mr. Rod Backman. Supporting the passage of North Dakota Measure Number 4 is a gentleman many of you know who will be single-handedly supporting the passage of the measure, a man who is truly the genesis of this very measure. So literally everything you hear tonight in support of the measure will be coming directly from the horse's mouth. Dr. Becker is a plastic surgeon, businessman, and a former state representative from Bismarck. Please welcome Dr. Rick Becker. Now let's talk about the mechanics of tonight's event. Each side will have 8 minutes, which they've assured me they will not need. That will be uninterrupted to state their positions on why a yes or a no vote would be in the best interest of North Dakota and North Dakotans. Mr. Becker will give his opening remarks first. Mr. Harms and Mr. Backman will follow him. Following that, I will open this forum up with questions from myself. Following those, the floor will be open to you fine, civic-minded citizens. When you have a question for the members on the stage tonight, please stand and be recognized to answer your question, and then move towards an aisle so that the person can bring the microphone to your location. That person will retain possession of the microphone. Any foul language or any personal attacks will not be tolerated or endured. We will continue to take questions until 8 p.m. or until there is no further input from tonight's audience. As moderator, I do reserve the right to ask questions of clarification to either or both sides at any time. Each represented side on the stage tonight will have 2 minutes to respond to mine and your questions. Each will have the opportunity to request 1-minute rebuttals from the moderator, and I will be fair and judicious in this application. After all your questions have been answered, each side on the stage tonight will have 3 minutes uninterrupted for closing remarks. Mr. Harms and Mr. Backman will close first, and the last close will go to Dr. Becker. Cassandra is in the front row here on the stage, and she is our timer tonight. So when you see a yellow card from her, it's really easy to see in this light. When you see that yellow card, you're at the 30-second mark. When you see the red card, wrap it up fast. And that's pretty much it right there, so let's get to it. Dr. Becker, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much for having this, for hosting this. Thank you all for coming out. Thanks, Bob and Rod, for being willing to discuss in such a public forum. I appreciate, and whenever something like this happens, it gives me I don't know, hope and confidence that we'll continue to be a society that can discuss things instead of always fight about things. To that end, I just want to say, try not to. I'm very passionate about it, but let's make sure we try not to get so impassioned as to vilify our neighbors and our fellow North Dakotans for their viewpoints. The people that are in favor of it think it's very exciting for North Dakota. They are optimistic about what they can do with the savings that they'll have. The people that are opposed to it are concerned about what they have been told about the measure and some of the downsides and what those effects are, and that's reasonable. Frankly, if I understood what the opposition's argument was and thought it to be accurate, I would also vote against this measure. So, about the measure, in very, very simple terms, this will allow everyone to keep what they're currently paying in property tax forevermore. It requires the state to replace that flat amount, no less than that amount going forward every year. And it converts how locals will do taxing in the future for future needs above the flat amount that the state replaces. It's that easy in a nutshell. I'll explain just a little bit more. When we think about what people are upset about with property taxes, I think I know, and I think that what people are most upset about, one is the valuations. We all got the estimated valuations of our property here just a few weeks ago. And a lot of times it doesn't seem fair. A lot of times it doesn't seem to make any sense. Didn't do anything to the property, didn't do anything to the house, and yet the valuations keep going up. And we know that valuations going up means we pay more in taxes. But we can't complain to the county commission or the city commission about it because their hands are tied. The person who put the valuation on isn't anyone we elected. There's very little we can do about it. The state forces the counties to be within a very small variance, 95% of sales ratio. So valuations are frustrating. They cause us to pay more taxes, but no one seems to be responsible for it. The county points their finger to the state points their finger to the county, right? And so the other thing about valuations is that we may live in our house for 20, 30, 40 years. Maybe our income's not going up. Maybe we're on a fixed income. Maybe we didn't do anything to the property, but the taxes keep going up. If not because of county budgets, city budgets, just valuations alone. So we don't like valuations. We also, I think, are frustrated or confused by mill levies. There are three major ways we get taxed: income tax, sales tax, property tax. One of the three major ways we get taxed, and the only way in which we can lose our home to the government, we don't understand. I don't know if there's anyone in the audience, and it wouldn't surprise me if there isn't, there usually wouldn't be, who truly understands how a mill levy works, how you figure out a mill levy. Most legislators don't know. I was a legislator from 2012 to 2022. I did not know how a mill levy worked until 2018. I can tell you many county and city commissioners don't truly know how it works. How can we be expected to advocate for ourselves as taxpayers when we don't understand how the system works? When we know there's this big old budget and they say, hey, you have opportunity, you can come to this meeting and complain or voice your concerns. But it's in mill levies and it's a huge budget which is broken down into all sorts of subcomponents. How can you really advocate for yourself? It's very difficult. And then the third thing that people don't like is just the idea that if you don't pay that tax, if you don't pay that rent, I'll put in air quotes, to the government, if you fall on hard times for 2.5 years, the government starts the foreclosure process and takes your house away from you or takes your business away from you. That's not right. If that can happen, we question, do you really ever own your property? So the way to get around those concerns is to convert away from taxing based on valuations. Valuations go away, mill levies go away, and so then people say, well, if you get rid of property taxes, there's not enough money. We didn't say get away from the funding, get away from the mechanism of funding that we don't like. There are many ways to skin a cat. These services, we understand we have to pay for the services. No one's trying to get a free meal here. We're going to pay for the services. Why not do it in a way that is transformative, that we actually are partners with our elected officials? We can hold them accountable more easily. I have had elected officials tell me one of the biggest things that concern them most is that you all can say no to a tax increase much easier if this passes. I find that concerning. Another thing that people don't like in North Dakota in particular is how much money the state spends. My thought, that's how I feel. My perception is that a significant number of North Dakotans feel that we have a spending problem at the state level. And in fact, sir, can you bring that one graph? I didn't know we were gonna have AV, so this is the only thing I'm gonna show because I can't toggle around. But I wanna show this to you. If you look on the lower side of that graph, North Dakota, South Dakota spending. South Dakota's in blue, North Dakota's in red. You see how we were right along tied with each other. North Dakota spending a little bit less per year. Now this, by the way, is non-federal spending. So we don't have that to kind of mix in and confuse us. And then you see in 2009, what happens? Oil money comes in, spending skyrockets. And then you see in these last several years, we've trailed out, and now we're kind of following South Dakota again, except we are spending $2 to $2.5 billion more per year, every single year than South Dakota. But before 2009, we were spending the same as them. What's changed? What has changed is that the state legislature has more money and they are spending it. This isn't money tucked away in funds that are constitutionally mandated, like the legacy and foundation aid and that. This is spending. That's what we need to focus on, spending. We have a spending problem. The legislature has not listened to the people of North Dakota. Back in 2012, they promised us, you vote this measure down, we will give you property tax relief, we will give you property tax reform. They have not. They have failed us. So now we have an opportunity to take what they should have done and force them to take $1 billion, depending on what numbers we use, $1.2 to $1.5 billion per year, out of that excess fund, out of that excess spending, and give it back to the people of North Dakota. So those are simple concepts. I would think everyone would say that's fantastic. So then I hope what we vet for you guys tonight is what the theoretical downsides are. I think that what is going to be proposed are incorrect. Again, I tell you, if what they are saying is true, I would not be doing this for one thing, and I would vote against it for another. We have to make sure that we vet the opponent's message very carefully and not just jump to a position of fear. That happens a lot. People in power, whether they're elected officials or the lobbyist class, use fear to manipulate us. So I'm so glad you're here tonight. I'm looking forward to answering the questions. When this passes, is everything going to be perfect? Probably not. This is a big change. We'd be the first state with no property tax. There are others working on it. Michigan's got an initiated measure. Texas, I was just in DC with a whole bunch of legislators and freedom people, and there are 3-4 other states that are working on it. So we'd be the first. We won't be the only one for very long, but we are the only one that can do it and not raise any other taxes or lose any services. We're the only ones. We talk about North Dakota legendary. This is legendary. We talk about legacy. Legacy means leaving something for future generations. This is the legacy we can leave for our children and our grandchildren.
Mr. Harms, Mr. Butler.
Yeah, Jeff, do you have our slides? My name's Rod Backman. I spent my whole life in taxation. I'm retired now, so I can't say that I'm a CPA and a CFP, but I was for a lot of years. 18 years in public accounting, mainly tax and investments, then 10 years at the budget office. And then after that, a consulting company where I did a lot of different tax studies, sales tax, property tax, oil taxes. And so let me also say that when I started out looking at this, I was impressed by it, and I looked at it and said, I might be able to support this. I even met with Rick and some of his supporters, and I had some questions that I didn't think were answered, but I went back and I started digging into the numbers because a couple of things were being promoted. One is that the state has enough money to do it. And two, I was concerned that there really isn't a plan for how local governments are going to tax going forward. So if you'd go to the second slide, please. When I look at it, I'm saying the state does not have enough ongoing revenues to support the $3 billion that's needed for Measure 4. If you look at some of their reserve funds, they probably have enough cash that they could fund Measure 4 for a year or maybe even the second year. But when you look at their ongoing revenue, I don't believe there's enough revenue there. So I would kind of equate it to this. You won the lottery, you got $100,000 and you go buy $1 million house. You have the $100,000 from the lottery winnings to make the down payment, but you don't have the income to keep making the payments on the house. And that's how I would kind of relate the state budget. They've got some cash in there where they could cover the first year or two, but if you look just at ongoing revenues and ongoing expenditures, it doesn't add up. Now, I do agree with Rick. They spend a lot more money than they should be. But when we're talking about $3 billion, keep in mind we're talking about $3,000 million. Next slide, please. So one of the things that happens, I've heard a lot of people say, well, they've got 19 or 20 billion dollars to take this 3 billion out of. Well, I just put this slide in to break that down quickly. The state has general funds, they have special funds, and they have federal funds. That's what makes up the 20 billion. The federal funds cannot be used to cover local property tax. Special funds are dedicated fees that are charged. For example, you buy a hunting license, that goes to Game and Fish. You pay your motor vehicle license, that goes for Highway Department. And then general fund, which is typically income tax, sales tax, that are used for general fund expenses. Next slide, please. Now, I said that to make one exception right away. The state really does have what I call a second general fund. It's called the SIF, Strategic Investment Improvement Fund. And even though they classify it as a special fund, it's general fund revenue and it's general fund expenditures. And that's what could fund Measure 4. But when you look at that for a 2-year period, that's $7.4 billion. Currently, I was talking about ongoing revenues. The last legislative session spent, between these two funds, they spent $1.5 billion more than what they have coming in revenue for the biennium. So they created a gap right away that they have to have another $1 billion just to hold their budget even. So now when you add that to Measure 4, now you're at $4 billion. That either has to be cuts or tax increases at the state level. So we're talking about a significant chunk of money compared to what's available. Next slide, please. So with this came from Legislative Council, and it kind of shows the same thing, that gap. On the far right there, the top line is the spending line, and the one below it is the income line. And it's covered by year, so sometimes income is higher, Sometimes expenses are higher, but right now, they have almost a $1 billion gap for ongoing revenue compared to ongoing expenses. Next slide, please. Bob, you want to take that?
This slide is designed to help you think about what's next if this passes. So Rick is right. One of the provisions that the measure calls for is for the state to pay your 2024 budget going forward. And it's frozen. That number, whether you're the city of White Earth, the Tioga School District, Williams County, that number then is frozen in the Constitution going forward. What it doesn't address is, what do those jurisdictions do for future years? They have new expenses, new buildings, inflation. That's not determined. And so what will be required by the legislature is to address that gap, that there's no plan as how do these political subdivisions meet that ongoing need for the future. We're going to have new taxes, whether it's a property tax or a sales tax or something, but it will require the legislature to address. Next slide, please. The other reason that I'm opposed to this is the measure produces a $1 billion per biennium windfall to property taxpayers from out of state. About 32% of the property taxes paid in North Dakota. The $3 billion that we pay in property taxes every 2 years, about a third of it is paid by homeowners, about a third by centrally assessed or commercial property owners, the majority of which are from out of state. That third is $1 billion that we're giving to people or companies that aren't asking for it, whether it's One Oak or Walmart or Menards. Take Williams County, for example. Menards pays $250,000 in property taxes here in Williams County. Multiply that times 8 or 9 stores around the state. Same is true with Walmart. Next slide, please. We think that what happens with this measure is that we are going too far. We're missing the mark. Ed Schaefer taught Rod and I both solve the problem. We're overshooting the mark, and we can do better by repealing and correcting the valuation that Rick was talking about, reviewing every exemptions that everybody in North Dakota gets, and lastly, limit property taxes increases to the rate of inflation so that everybody in North Dakota knows that their property tax is not going to go up based upon an increase in their valuation.
Right on the money. Thank you, gentlemen. Go ahead, clap it up. I think we all know what happens if the measure fails, but what the greatest fear is that Dr. Becker talked about, I think, is a fear that I've had since a child, and it is the fear of the unknown. And I would like each representatives tonight to paint us a futuristic picture on what you believe the North Dakota legislature could do and how that tax landscape would then look should the measure pass. Dr. Becker. 2 minutes.
All right, so there's a couple things that the legislature needs to do. First off, I'll reiterate, and I believe that the opponents will agree that according to this measure, there is no loss of funding. The Council for Educational Leaders is putting out misinformation that the schools could lose 40% of their funding and all of that. The measure would be in the Constitution stating the state must replace no less than. So when Bob says that a budget or something is frozen in the Constitution, the locals are in charge of their budget. The budget's not frozen in the Constitution. The floor of what the state can replace is frozen in the Constitution. That's true. But that's all that's frozen in the Constitution. So the legislature must do a couple of things. First off, they have to replace that amount. And I don't think that was the gist of the question, so I'll get into that later on how they replace the alleged 3.1, which is not really, and I'll get into that too. But what they must do to allow the locals to maintain full control, in other words, to allow to take the handcuffs off the locals so they can raise the revenue they need above what the state replaces, because we know those needs are going to increase. There's inflation. gravel costs more, you need to buy a new fire truck, whatever it might be. We know those needs are there. The goal here is to not only retain local control, but to increase local control for the local elected officials, but also for the people. The state needs to do a couple of very simple things. There are restrictions, and we all talk, or the opponents talk about the restrictions as though that's there. There's nothing we can do about it. They are restrictions because that's what's put in the century code. That's what the legislature does, is it changes the century code every 2 years to accommodate whatever is needed. So they need to simply take the handcuffs off, change some of the language so that we allow the locals to raise the revenue they need. Right now, there's pages and pages of limitations and restrictions on how you do property tax. Townships, for example, are limited to a valuation-based property tax of up to 18 mills except for circumstances. Why is that a restriction? Why does that scare townships so that they say, we can't support this, we're not gonna have any money? Because it's a line in the century code. That's our laws, the book of laws. So in January, there'll be a bill that's introduced and it will pass and it will say the townships can now use these other ways. So that's all I have for the time, but it's very, very easy.
Thank you. Mr. Backman, Mr. Harms.
So I have a difficult time telling you what the legislature is going to do because I don't really know. And that's one of my issues with Measure 4 is there's a big unknown of how local governments are going to replace their tax. I've asked the question, and some supporters this as well. Let me back up, because you can't base it on the value of property. Some supporters have said, well, you can base it on roof size or per acre or on curb length. Well, if you have a 200-foot curb length lot with no improvement on it, and your neighbor has a 200-foot lot with $1 million house on it, I'm not going to be very excited about paying the same tax. Or if I have some very poor farmland and 2 miles down the road is some really rich farmland and it's based on a per acre amount, that doesn't seem fair either. I really don't know what the legislature is going to do, but that's some of my question. How is this going to work? I'm not comfortable voting for it without having some kind of idea of what's going to replace the current tax.
And I would add that all of those political subdivisions, whether it's the townships, the school boards, the park boards, all of them will need some kind of new taxing authority. A township doesn't have sales tax authority. School board doesn't have sales tax authority. Counties and city governments, some have home rule charters that allow for sales tax. But we're looking at having to create an entirely new unknown taxing regime to replace the revenues that the local level will need going forward. I think Rick and I are in agreement. The budget number that they get, the number in 2024 is frozen. What we're trying to figure out is how do they address ongoing spending for future years? And that's the tax system that we're going to have to design from whole cloth.
He's timing himself. I love it. Okay, gentlemen, this constitutional measure differs from many, if not all, other constitutional measures North Dakotans have voted on in the past. Truly, the only North Dakotans immediately impacted by its passage would be those North Dakotans owning property. What would be your convincing argument to those who do not own property on how to vote and why? Mr. Becker, Dr. Becker.
Well, so if we're talking about renters, you've got people who rent farmland, people who rent commercial space, people who rent residential apartments or houses. We all pay property tax. If you rent an apartment, you're paying the property tax that's built into your rent. If you're a small business owner, you don't happen to own the little building you're in, but you're leasing space, a good part of the rent you're paying covers the property tax. So we pay it. Now, I have a property in Bismarck and I have tenants in it and they pay me rent. Now we could say, because I make the point, whether you're an apartment or commercial, you will see the benefit. And people say, it's ridiculous. The landlords are greedy, they're going to keep all of it. And I'm not going to try and dissuade you from the idea that the landlords are greedy. Let's say they're greedy. The best way you make money as a landlord is to not have any vacancies in whatever building you're trying to lease out. When the property tax goes away, in my building, for instance, I pay the property tax. It's a gross rent. My competitors down the street with the building, they have triple net. Their tenants pay property tax directly. As soon as this goes away, all of his tenants get a huge break. If I don't give the break to my tenants, they will move out and I will go bankrupt. That's how it works. So when we're talking residential, same type of situation. Does the apartment owner just want to give the money? Maybe they do, but let's say they don't. Let's say they want to keep every dang dollar they can. They must keep their units rented. And if they don't lower the rent, or at least not increase the rent in the future, they will find tenant vacancies, because those people are going to go to the new apartment building that got built because they realized they could build one and make a bunch of money, because now this guy's trying to be too greedy. The other thing you can do is the landlord will make property improvements. So if you're renting, you will find that now perhaps your landlord can afford to give new utilities, the new carpet, the nice fence, and so forth.
Mr. Backman, Mr. Harms.
Yeah, I think this one is real easy. If I understood the question right, what do you tell somebody who doesn't pay property tax is going to happen? And I would say, where the state's involved, if the state is going to pick up and replace the property tax and you don't pay property tax, the state has limited resources too, and they're going to be looking at income tax and sales tax. Now, granted, some of it can come from cutting, but I don't think they can get it all cutting. Based on the numbers I showed you before, they're going to have to raise some kind of taxes. So if you're not paying property tax, expect your income and sales tax to go up.
And I would just add to that maybe look past your own personal checkbook. I mean, everybody in this room would pay less property taxes if this thing passes. Rod and I aren't up here because somebody is paying us to do this. We're up here because we think this is bad policy for our state that we were born and raised in. And that's the real answer, because of the impact. It freezes that budget number in the Constitution. It provides a windfall for out-of-state companies of $1 billion every year. The state doesn't have the revenue to pay for this thing, and it has a potential impact to local communities, cities and counties statewide that get now $1 billion to help pay for the services that you enjoy right now. Those are the reasons that we should vote against this, whether I rent an apartment or I own a home.
Thank you, gentlemen. This is my final question. It's a little bit lengthy, but I believe the historical preamble is necessary. Many of us, if not all of us in the room tonight, have lived through the Bakken boom years in the Williston Basin, and we remember the deal that was struck in the 1950s between the state and the front-end political subdivisions representing western North Dakota. In a nutshell, the two parties agreed that in lieu of the local political subdivisions levying property taxes on the companies producing oil and gas to cover the impacts from oil and gas development, the state of North Dakota would impose a 4% gross production tax on these same companies and the mineral royalty recipients, and then return the necessary funds to pay for these impacts. The impacts were staggering, and for years and years, the state of North Dakota continually reneged on their responsibility to fully fund these justifiable impacts to oil and gas development. Many times it was only 30 cents on the dollar. My question is, and we'll go to Mr. Harms and Mr. Backman first, that knowing this recent history with the state, why should the taxpayers of North Dakota believe the state will have their back on providing sufficient funding for the day-to-day costs of critical components to a well-functioning political subdivision?
Well, Steve, great question. By the way, it's the tax was 5%, not 4%.
I stand corrected.
Okay.
So,
I think the question poses the fundamental issue, and that is, can you trust the legislature, the legislators, to craft a system that takes care of local government going forward from 2024 in amounts that adequately provides those local governments with the revenue that they need to do what they do right now. And I don't know that they have the ability to do that in one legislative session in 80 days and do it well. Here's another thing that concerns me. That is, Measure 2 is out there also. If we pass Measure 4, it's a constitutional measure. If Measure 2 passes, it then requires us to vote not once, but twice if we have to fix this thing and it needs adjustments that we reveal a year or two down the road. So, short answer to your question, I'm not sure you can count on the legislature.
Mr. Beckman?
And get rid of them.
Dr. Beckman?
All right, well, I don't count on the legislature at all. I was there for 10 years. I don't think they necessarily have our back. At least experience would suggest that sometimes if we hope they do, they have let us down, sometimes not. I don't want to always be bashing the legislature, but here's the thing. This measure does not rely on the legislature having your back. The Constitution forces them to replace every single dollar to every single subdivision on the amount that's being levied, that's going to be levied here in the next month or so. It mandates that. The locals are responsible for raising what they need above that. That's how we retain local control. If we didn't do it that way, we would arguably lose local control. Why will the legislature pass this? Not because they're necessarily wise or necessarily benevolent or, gracious. They're going to do it because even when you listen to the opposition, allegedly we don't have enough money hardly to even do this. So the legislature needs to do a few simple things that empower, that take the handcuffs off the locals so they can raise the revenue they need. That's why they're going to do it, because if they don't take those handcuffs off, then they'll be on the hook, or they'll be at least politically responsible for the demise of North Dakota towns. They're going to do it. It's extremely easy to do. You just take off the restrictions. Let the locals raise what they need with taxes that are more fair and transparent so that you and I can go to meetings, we can have discussions with our elected officials. They will do it because it makes sense financially when they don't want to close down small town North Dakota and they don't want to foot a bigger bill. There's only one way to avoid those two things. Take the handcuffs off the locals, let them raise the money they need. Then we don't have to worry about whether the state has our back.
Thank you, Dr. Beckman.
Steve?
Yes, you want a rebuttal?
Please.
1 minute.
Just to be clear, Rick and I are in agreement on this piece, that the measure places in the Constitution the budget number, the number of every political subdivision based upon their 2024 budget. We agree on that. Where there's a gap is that park districts, school boards, county government, townships, they don't have any independent authority other than what the state of North Dakota gives to them. They are creatures of the state, and they can only do what the state authorizes them to do through the legislature. And so that's where the devil is in the details. That's where it's going to have to take place, is in the legislature.
Mr. Beckman, anything on that? Okay.
53,
Well,
that's
you're good?
exactly.
Okay, I got this party started with a few questions. Let's have it up to you to keep it going. Who would like to ask a question to the panel tonight? Sure. Just hang on a second. We'll get a microphone to you, because
thank you, gentlemen, for coming tonight and having a debate and letting us ask you some questions. First thing that just came to mind, what you just said here, it sounds like the state legislature in Bismarck has too much power. So maybe we ought to take that power away from the legislature and give it to local control for like city parks and stuff like that. Why does the park commission in Williston need to get permission from Bismarck? Why can't we control, we know what we want here in Williston, people in Bismarck don't know what we want or need or should have. So with that being said, I get the impression there's a lot of can't do this, can't do that. And the way I was taught in the Marines, can't isn't in the vocabulary of a leader. Leaders never quit and quitters never lead. So I get the impression the politicians, the career politicians, can't always seems to be their get out of jail free card. And so instead of saying, I can't do this, I can't do that, how about we start saying we can't do, because something tells me the men and women that homesteaded out here in North Dakota in the 1800s didn't expect a red carpet to be rolled out for them because it was easy. They came out here because they had a can-do attitude, they had that grit, and I don't see that here.
Do you have a question, Maureen?
Yeah, I do. I'm getting to it. I just find what you're saying here, you're not solving the problem. You just kind of need to take the politicians out of it. And I would suggest, I love Dr. Becker's suggestion. I think it's a great idea. I support it. I believe we should try it. If it doesn't work, we can always go back to the old way. But I would preferably like to get the politicians to clear out and just go to a straight flat tax and keep you all out of it, and then figure out whatever that is, 14%, and get rid of all the taxes, and that 14% or 15%, whatever it takes to cover the state budget. That way, everybody in the state of North Dakota, doesn't matter if you make 1 penny or if you make $1 billion, everybody has skin in the game, and everybody's got to pay into the system.
Do you have a question?
Well, I'm just saying, I don't know why, you're saying the reason why you don't want to do what Dr. Becker is because there's too many unknowns. That's the way I take it. You're not sure if you can't trust the state legislature to pass a law to make sure that we have the money that we need to cover that deficit. So if we can't trust them to do that, what can we trust them at? That's my question.
Thank you, Maureen. That easy. Gentleman in the back, we'll get a microphone to you.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, yes.
Well, and the gentleman in opposition can. Yeah, well, and so I think, I kind of understand. So he brings up the point or the question in a challenge to the opposition. If we are unable to trust them to do what I'm suggesting, how can we trust them to do what they're suggesting, which is other reforms? Bob and Rod's last slide, I think, showed reforms that, this is too much, but these are some things we should do. Those things were all tried. Those things were all brought to the legislature, and they all failed. The members of the opposition lobbied the legislators to kill every one of those reforms. And they say, there's new legislators now. They just did it last year. My friend, the late Senator Doug Larson, he and I had many talks about this. And he told his fellow senators, if we do not do something significant in reform and relief, there will be an initiated measure. And they laughed at him. And they killed his bill, and they killed all the bills. They did it in 2013. If you think, now they're going to pay attention. Now they're going to respect the citizens. The year after the 2012 measure failed, many reforms were brought to the legislature. They all got killed. If we don't do it, the legislature is not going to do it for us. The reason I'm saying they will do what's necessary to implement the constitutional measure properly is because it's in their own best interest. That's the only thing I can count on.
And that's why they want Measure 2 to pass as well, so we don't have a say.
Opportunity to respond?
Yeah, I would say they can do it, and if the measure passes, they'll be forced to do it. But when we're voting, we don't know what those consequences are. I would have preferred to see a measure that told us what's going to happen. What is the plan for replacing these local taxes? I think Dr. Becker and the sponsors were brilliant in this because they laid out the plus side of this, get rid of property tax. But they haven't laid out the negative side, what kind of tax is going to replace it.
And
All the
let me
same
add
in this
a
one.
couple of other things. There's three reasons that I've talked about why I'm opposed to this measure. The local control issue that the Marine just mentioned is part of the issue, but the other two things, number one, it freezes into our Constitution numbers that are unfair in budgets. And I'll give you an example. Montreal County, they levied $2.2 million for their budget. They provided $3.5 million in property taxes. Montreal County is going to get $2.5 million from the state legislature forever. They'll never make up that. Those kinds of inequities are frozen into our Constitution. That's number one. And then the other reason is because the state can't afford it. That $7.4 billion number that Rod had up here, you have the general fund and SIP. We have $7 billion that we operate on. You hear about 19 billion, that's nonsense. We have $7 billion that we work with. This measure, we can't debate the number. When you go to the ballot, the measure will say this costs the state of North Dakota $3.1 billion. There's no debate to that. That number is decided by the legislature and the fiscal analysis of this measure. That is part of the point, is that we have $7.4 billion to spend. We have a $4.1 billion hole to start with. If you can go home and take over half of your budget and reallocate it, that's what the legislature is going to be asked to do.
I have a quick rebuttal.
That went a little over. I'll allow it, Dr. Becker.
There's so much there. First off, why are the details not in the Constitution? Because they don't belong in the Constitution, because the fine details of how the locals will raise the revenue they need to provide the services to you that you want changes. Right now, we have a one-size-fits-all property tax. When this passes, your local elected officials will be able to tailor it to your needs. Your needs are probably different than Fargo's, and they're probably different than Velva's. Okay, that's one. Second thing, we hear a lot of, oh, it's unfair to this county or that county. I call bullcrap. Every person in every county will no longer pay what they're currently paying in property taxes. They try and pit county versus county. Everyone who's paying property taxes saves that money in their pocket every single time. The last thing, again, going to this frozen inequity. There's not a frozen budget. There's not a frozen amount. There is a floor. Bob is incorrect when he keeps saying frozen. There is a floor. If there is a true and significant inequity for any political subdivision, they can make up for that. It's a floor. It's the bottom least amount they can put in there.
Thank you. Sir, thanks for standing. Thanks for waiting. Your order will be right in a minute.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. First, I want to thank the Marine and every other service veterans that's here. I want to thank you for your service for our nation. You know, I keep hearing, you know, the Constitution with unknowns. I like to ask, have you two read Article 10 of the North Dakota Constitution? Okay, Section 1, the legislative assembly shall be prohibited from raising revenue to defray the expense of the state through the levying of a tax on assessed value of real or personal property. It's already in it. It's already spelled out on how a lot of this is supposed to be spent. So to get rid of property tax, it's already in our North Dakota Constitution. So my question is, why are you trying to take people's property? Because that's the biggest thing. What you're doing is you're violating the Constitution. You're taking people who are on fixed incomes, their livelihood, because it's not just. And as Dr. Becker mentioned earlier, if somebody has a $250,000, $500,000 house and you don't pay in 2 to 3 years, it's gone. That's not right. And as far as the legislators, this nation was built on a lot of can-do attitude, from the Civil War to the surprise attack in Pearl Harbor to all the different things that we had done. And you put a bunch of people who want to do what's right and you can see the synergy fix any situation. We from the Wright brothers are landing and flying around in space and going Mach 7 because people can and want to when they have a purpose. And right now our purpose is get rid of property tax. Thank you.
While that was very eloquent and very nice, this is not a forum for public statements. This is a forum for your questions. Maybe a lot of people here that do have questions. We want to respect that. Who else would like to jump into the fray? There you go. Right back there.
As I was watching the charts put up on the big screen, I noted that the chart put up by the opposition actually supported the chart that Dr. Becker put up in saying that our state has a spending problem. Now, one of the reforms say that we should reform how property taxes properties are currently evaluated. And you stated that there's cash money available to fund the needs that removal of property tax would provide for at least 2 years. I kind of like the idea, and I'm wondering what our opposition thinks. Are you in favor of the fact of passing this measure and then holding the legislators' feet to the fire, give them the next 2 years to figure that out and fix it? And maybe the so-called assessment reforms would actually happen if they had to. Thank you.
I believe that would be directed to you two, Mr. Backman, Mr. Barnes.
Yeah, I think there were several questions in there. The one dealing with the funding, when I said that they'd have enough money maybe to cover it for 1 to 2 years, that would be spending down all their rainy fund and reserves and beginning fund balances. I'm not sure that's a good idea. The point I was making is, if you're just looking at that, yeah, there might be enough money there to do it. But the bigger issue is, where are you going to get the ongoing revenue to pay for it after a year or two? And we don't really have the option on this measure to say, pay it for 2 years and then we'll revisit it. If it's in the Constitution, then we go with that until it's changed by a similar method.
And then let me add to that. I go back to what Schaefer taught both of us. Solve the problem. I don't agree with the idea that we should pass it and let the legislature figure it out in a couple of years because we overshoot the mark. The problem in this debate is this. Every one of you is a homeowner. You got a tax statement from the county, and many of you see your valuation go up, and then your property tax went up. We have an automatic increase. So I use Bismarck as an example. A couple years ago, Bismarck property went up 17%. If park districts, school boards, counties, and cities don't lower the tax rate, the mill, your property goes up. That's what we ought to fix. That's the problem. And we overshoot the mark by putting this into our Constitution. We will have we'll have a lot of difficulty to fix with Measure 2.
A request for a vote.
All right, or just my,
London.
okay. No, not 2 minutes for the question? Because I didn't start, they started. Correct. All right. So first off, Bob earlier said that there's no debate on the 3.1. It's going to be on the ballot, $3.1 billion over the biennium. And he's right, it's going to be on the ballot. The number is debatable, though. I want to point out that if the opposition had good, honest arguments, they wouldn't need to inflate numbers to try and scare the pants off of you. The reason that the legislature picked that number is because the tax commissioner came to them and said, here's how much it's going to cost this year. Unfortunately, the tax commissioner put in taxes to be replaced that won't need to be replaced, like electric transmission line taxes. He was wrong on that. The Legislative Council has already put out memos noting how much is going to need to be replaced. They say about 2.4 or 2.5 billion. This was in June of this year. Then, get this, the tax commissioner said, you know, and then we have to have an increase from last year to this year. We don't know what it's going to be until December. So what you could do is what most of you would do, what I would have done, said, well, let's do the average of the last 5 years. That's probably going to be fairly accurate. He said, or you could do a second possibility, do the average of the last 2 years. It's a higher number because of the inflation that we had. Or what you could do is 10 years ago, there was a ridiculously high increase in overall property tax revenue because that's the year that all the pipelines went in. Why don't we use that number? And the legislature said, yes, that's the number we're going to use. It's 3.15 billion. If they were honest and they had good arguments, they wouldn't need to try and fool us and scare us. Here's what I would challenge my opposition. They don't need, Rod, that you're going to have to dip into the rainy day and the reserves. No, that's absolutely not true. Do you know that there is going to be over $600 million in legacy fund interest and earnings, not the principal, and that amount is going to increase every 2 years dramatically because there's already about $11 billion in that fund? Do you know that the Legislative Council just pointed out that there are going to be over $700 million of excess revenue they didn't know in the general fund? Do you know that the Legislative Council pointed out that there are over $700 million that the legislature gave to private businesses in 2023, your tax dollars to private businesses? And lastly, do you know that for the next year, the Legislative Council forecasted and based their forecast on $62 barrel of oil for all of 2025? But the federal government, the short-term energy forecasting indicates that it's going to be 30% higher than that. We have so much money. We can do this easily without touching the reserves.
We will move on. Who else has a question? Right there, we're ready. Sorry.
Yeah, I got a statement and a question. Doesn't it come down to one thing? Don't we have to come to the honest decision to hire individuals to do the job in the legislature rather than political hacks? And is not this repeal of property tax a slap up against the head to let them know we're not happy? Is this where it starts? Isn't it time that we started?
Very good. We all have a voice, so thank you. We're over here now. Ladies' view, this ought to be really good.
My friend Steve. Anyway, I have a little bit of a preamble too, because I read an article that talked about since 1924, North Dakotans have been trying to address property taxes in the state. And I know we've gone to a little bit of the history, recent history, about these measures didn't pass, or this failed, or yes, we'll address it. Well, in the meantime then, inflation and increased property valuations. And one thing that was accurate in the beginning was that everybody's pointing to everybody else. Oh, it's not the city's problem, it's the counties, it's not the counties, it's the state. The state comes back and says, well, everybody's hands are tied. So my question is that as a responsible citizen of North Dakota, can I not go ahead and maybe talk to legislators at some point, like go to Bismarck or talk to my own representatives about ironing out some of these things that were brought up, like the out-of-state ownership. Why can there not be a bill crafted to address out-of-state ownership? If that's such a big concern that Walmart, Menards, and all these other ones will not be paying. I mean, there's such common sense available. And I agree with the Marine that said, we have to have the can-do attitude. Everybody would like to be able to keep a little bit more of their money. And the most onerous thing is that if you have people who are on fixed incomes, having to face these increased valuations, it is terrible for them. And so my question is, can the citizens go ahead and talk to the legislatures about doing common sense measures that will go ahead and address some of these conditions that the opponents have brought up?
Dr. Becker.
They sure can, and if this doesn't pass, I encourage them to. I don't have a lot of hope because of the history from 2013 on at good, solid reforms, that if a handful of those reforms, well, if even one of the really good reforms had come up, I wouldn't be putting in the effort to make this happen. But they didn't, and we can discuss why, but they didn't, even though the people had spoken to them. So we can try, we always should try. If this fails, we must go there and do it. But I would rather rely on us doing this very significant thing and then going there and working with them to make sure they hear us on how they take the handcuffs off of cities and counties and townships and school districts so they can raise the revenue that they need for their people. One other short little point I would have, kind of related, is a lot of these unknowns that are scaring people. In 1969, I believe 68, it started, North Dakota had a personal property tax, right? You had to pay a tax on your guns and your furs and your boats and your electronics and all that kind of stuff. And in the late 60s, North Dakota was looking at getting rid of that. And there were people sitting in Rod and Bob, holy buckets. It was so windy coming up here, it must have rattled my brains a little bit. But there were folks in the opposition seats that said, no, we can't do this. We're not going to be able to fund this. How are we going to get this funded? We're going to lose that service. We're going to lose this service. The sky is falling. They said that for personal property tax in the late 60s. And now we don't have personal property tax and everything is okay. And when this passes, everything will be okay.
Bob and Rod, would you like to respond?
I'll let Rick know I was 7 years old and I supported the repeal of the personal property tax. Actually remember assessor coming to my parents' house and asking them, how many suits do you have? How many cows do you have? How many tractors, pickups? But I was not opposed. I would just like to comment on one other thing. He brought up the $600 million from the legacy fund, and that's true. Those earnings are there. But what I would point to on our numbers is that's already in there. That's in the revenue forecast, and that's in the spending. The legislature has been spending those dollars ever since 2017. So it's not like it's new money that's thrown in there.
Well, and I would add this to 2 points. One, all of us agree with the woman's premise that property taxes, the valuation, how they're operating today is unfair in a lot of ways. We all got those notices. Some of us, our taxes didn't go up. Some of us did. I talked to a fellow tonight, his property taxes tripled in value. I have a close friend whose property taxes went up 40%. So we're not defending the property tax system. We're just saying, look, we're overshooting the mark. We're putting this into our Constitution. Rick says he's kind of dismissive about this spenders and savers thing. Every political subdivision in North Dakota has a budget number that is going to be frozen into the Constitution. The fiscal conservatives that have been managing your money correctly and aren't raising your property taxes, they're going to be penalized because their budget number is frozen. The spenders who are spending money like drunken sailors, they're going to be rewarded because that number is frozen in the Constitution. Let me offer one last thing. In terms of reform and having a tailored solution, the legislature that convenes in 2025 is going to be different than the legislature that convened 15 years ago. And the fact that 40,000 people signed this petition is going to be a huge signal to those legislators. This problem needs to be fixed. Short rebuttal.
Short rebuttal, 1 minute.
All right. just to what Rod was saying, I don't mean to indicate that money from the legacy fund earnings, which again is going to be over $600 million, is all available or not spent. Yes, some of it was spent in 2017, and as the legislators kept getting their foot in a little further and a little further, they loved the idea. So just in this last session, did they start spending a more significant amount? But still, they're not spending all of it. And we can look at what they're spending it on, and it's not the right way to be spending legacy fund money. Doing a property tax replacement, that's actually legacy. The other thing is, even if we were to take, say, the $200 million that they're not using, the gentleman talk about how, well, what are we going to do in the future? The legacy fund earnings are going to keep increasing. So if we have 200 available now and we can make it work, please be aware we're going to have 400 million extra in 2 years, and then 600. That keeps growing. So that completely, I think, wipes out the argument of the lack of sustainability of using these types of funds without depleting the principal.
I want to applaud the comment and the question. This lady is involved in small engine repair, but she did a big citizen repair. When we're talking about all the fingers that are being pointed at who and who, they're all pointed right at us, ladies and gentlemen. We're the citizens. We make the rules. So thank you very much for pointing that out. Next question, I believe this gentleman's been standing for a second.
I'm not going to stand here forever. We're supposed to get $500 at the end of the year as a tax preparer. I get a tax refund from my property tax, which is fine. The only problem was they raised the value of the property. It's kind of like going to the store. They raise the price on something, and then they turn around and put a sales price on it, and they still make 10 cents per dollar or whatever it is. So they raise their prices and then lower it a little bit until you get a good sale here. The
question? Your question?
Yeah, it's coming. I don't see any yellow flags going off, but now you made me forget what I was just going to say. Oh no! Hey, when we were going around getting the petition to get this on the ballot, we had a piece of paper that showed a bunch of money that at least $2 billion that they could cut. They don't have to spend it. It's wasteful spending. I heard on the radio a lady over in Fargo. She found $1 billion, and then part of what they're doing in Fargo is they're taxing the people to fund DEI and other types of social stuff that we don't need. My question to you people is, why don't we live within our budget? I have a constitution in my house. It says, don't spend more than you make. We're giving those people a certain amount of money, and they damn well better figure out how to spend it properly instead of wasteful spending. So answer me the question is, why don't they save money instead of just blowing it?
Rod or Bob?
So the question is, why don't they just save money rather than spend it?
Why don't they just not spend it on stupid stuff that they don't need? We don't need to spend money on DEI. People are worried about getting their feelings hurt. Go someplace where you're not going to get your feelings hurt.
Well, there's hundreds of millions of dollars that we might all agree that we wouldn't have spent the way the legislature has spent. So, but the spending is really not the issue. The issue for tonight is, do we put into our Constitution this amendment that says you can no longer tax property based upon valuation, and that we're all going to get a tax shift and let the state pay for our property tax bill? That's the question.
He just said the spending is not the issue.
Let's $3 billion. Well, we found it. So instead of spending the $3 billion on stuff that we don't need, take the property taxes away.
Yeah, I can respond to that. Or can I respond to that? So the wasteful spending worksheet that you talk about was one of the things that really got my attention when I first dug into this. It says annual waste 750 million. But then when you go to add up the numbers on there, they don't add up to 750 million. They actually add up to about $1 billion. But when you add up the pie chart numbers, they're a different number. So I started going through the numbers on here. And for several of these are federal funds, which cannot be used. Some are federal COVID funds. Some are theater library, which are really an accounting function because that full appropriation was funded in the 2019 session. Most of the numbers on here are 2-year budget numbers. So how do you get a whole list that comes up to $1 billion? But if they're 2-year numbers, that's not $1 billion annually, that's half of that annually. There are several other numbers on here that were loans that are probably never going to happen. So a lot of this is an accounting, not an actual expenditure by the legislature. And the biggest item that really throws that number off is that most of the numbers on here are for a 2-year budget, not a 1-year budget.
Dr. Becker?
Yes, so that is those things listed are examples. I went through the 552 page budget from the 2023 session. What I pulled out, this is not a complete accounting, Rod. This is not like looking at some taxpayer's return. These are examples to show the ridiculousness of what the government spends money on. And yes, some of them are loans, but they're loans that are intended to be forgiven. One of them you can say, well, that was an old loan, except it was just forgiven in this session. And as the numbers that, and I'd be happy if anyone wants to go through an Excel spreadsheet of the 550 pages, these numbers are solid. I can guarantee that. We keep talking, the gentlemen say, well, it's not a spending issue. Yes, it is a spending issue. They've already acknowledged, they agree that we have wasteful spending. So really, and they agree that the locals are going to be funded, and they agree on so much stuff. What we're getting down to is the nitpicky of how much is wasteful spending. And then they make it confusing because they want to say, oh, you can only use this fund or that fund. Well, I tell you what, money is fungible. If you get a fund here, it makes it so you don't have to spend money out of this fund there. They move it around. When I showed you the South Dakota chart, that's one way of looking at things. If you look on the website, there are a couple of others. If you look at the per capita spending increase of all of the states over a 15-year period, and then compare it to North Dakota's, North Dakota has about twice the spending increase per capita as all of the other states. Obviously, that includes California and Illinois and New York and New Jersey. And if we spent the average of the increase of all the other states, we'd be spending over $2 billion less than we currently are. And you can look at it a third way. The final thing I'll say on this, let's say 2012 was a good spending year. We had increased a lot already with the oil money. But let's say that was the perfect amount. So let's just increase it for inflation and population growth and run those numbers out. If you do that, it shows that even by that method, we're spending over $2 billion more per year. Every which way you look at it, we're overspending by that amount. So we can keep looking at these funds and say, well, you can't this, that. They're spending too much, they can stop. And I'm sorry, I'll get back to it at my next turn.
Gentleman here has been standing a while.
So the long and the short of it is, we're going to trade one tax for something else tax. Right?
Okay, so I really want to respond to that. So whenever I have time, I will.
Okay, go for it.
All right. So, number one, the amount you're paying now, you are going to keep. There does not need to be a tax increase to replace that amount. They can take the excess funds they have, they can take the interest, they can stop the corporate welfare and giving money to corporations. And that will cover that amount. So that is not a tax for a tax. Going forward, yes, you're trading a property tax based on valuations for a tax that's more straightforward, like a municipal operations tax or an infrastructure maintenance tax, something that's more transparent, more fair, and you can talk to your people. I've had, and I'm not saying you're suggesting this, but I've had other people say, well, this is crap. You're just trading one tax for another tax. And I say, if you had a child who had a significant other who was a horrible person and treated them horribly, and your child was looking at and had met someone else, maybe a better life partner, someone who treated them the way they should be treated, would you say, oh, well, you're just trading one boyfriend for another boyfriend? Yes, we're trading a tax for future increases only. We're trading one tax for another, but we're trading a crappy tax that is unfair, not transparent, and can kick you out of your home for a tax that is more reasonable and the proper way for people to work with their local governments. That's a good trade.
Rod or Bob?
Well, I would say, as I had stated earlier, I've spent my whole life in tax. I have never, ever seen a fair tax. Every tax out there, no matter how hard the legislature or the sponsors try to arrange it, it's always unfair to somebody. It's one of the reasons why it's important to have a balance of multiple different taxes. Because if you happen to be that individual or that company that's getting ripped off by the tax system, at least if there's multiple taxes, you're not hit that way all the time. I would also say there is no way that there's enough money. I agree they spend too much. I agree there's places you could cut, but there's no way that they can cut almost half of the general fund budget out to pay for Measure 3. There's going to have to be tax increases someplace at the state level.
And I would just add to that. So remember Rod's number, $7.4 billion that we're working with. And let's agree that there's $500 million of spending that all of us would not spend out of that 7.4 billion. Okay, so now we have 7 billion to work with. And we've still got to find 3 billion. Can you cut 3 billion out of 7? You challenge. My guess is you're going to at least have to have $1 billion, $1.5 billion of new tax revenue. It's going to have to come from sales tax or new property tax structure that we haven't really talked about, whether it's on a square footage basis or a per acre basis or linear feet. Let me say one other thing. I want to go back to the legacy fund for just a minute. I was an architect of the legacy fund, and it was designed to replace oil revenues when oil revenues go down. You guys have been up here in this area. You know full well that oil check is going to go down someday, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years. That's what the legacy fund is designed to do. Right now, the legislature from 2017, legacy fund has earned $1.9 billion, and they have spent $1.8 billion on all of us, including a $100 million bond issue in the flood control project in Minot, the water supply project in Fargo. But that fund falls short by half right now for replacing oil revenues when we need it. So the legacy fund is something that should not be considered ever in terms of paying property taxes, but right now there's paying $200 million out of legacy fund earnings to pay our property taxes.
Thank you, gentlemen. We've heard from the United States Marine Corps. Let's hear from the North Dakota Army National Guard. First Sergeant, you're up.
I didn't. I like pushing buttons. So my statement is, as a combat veteran, I know a lot of veterans that are disabled, and as a thank you that North Dakota does for a lot of our veterans is they do exempt their property taxes. So my question is what is the guarantee that if everybody is now exempt from paying property taxes, what is the guarantee that these veterans that have that exempt currently, other taxes such as vehicles when they renew their tags or sales taxes aren't going to go up and end up hurting them in that area?
Dr. Becker, sure. There is no guarantee. There is no guarantee. I'll always give you an honest answer.
But what's interesting is that that will no longer be up to the state because the increased amount that the locals will be doing is up to the locals. They make their budget. And if they wish to give an exemption for a disabled veteran, they absolutely can do that. Hopefully the people in their community will support that.
Mr. Harms, Mr. Backman.
You know, I don't want to defend the legislature because I really do believe that they have not done a good job of dealing with this issue for a long, long time. But I will point out that what this debate is thrown out is that the solution to fixing this is not simple. And when the legislature goes through their process, it's a hearing process where you all can come in and give your testimony as to how you think it should be structured. And when they go through that process, they're hearing from people saying, do this, no, don't do that, back and forth on every issue. So coming up with an answer that's debated and everybody is comfortable with is almost impossible. Maybe that's an argument for the measure, but I'm just saying it's really a difficult issue, and I think measure 4 is an oversimplification as far as a solution.
And I'd add, you know, Rod makes a great point. When you go to the legislature, you might think that you're asking for a 1970 Chevelle 396, red on black. That's what you've ordered. But when it comes out of committee, well, then the legislator from Fargo wants a Corvette, and the guy from Hettinger thinks that he said it should that. And by the time it comes out of committee, it's actually a Corvette with the engine in the back, and it's like and let me offer one other thing. The local governments, this isn't harm stopping, this is the law. The local governments do not have any authority other than what the legislature gives them. They don't, if the concern about the veteran being no longer exempt, if the legislature decides to tax that veteran's car license or anything else, the legislature will make that decision, not the park board, not the school board, not the county or the city commission.
Dr. Becker.
I'll tell you what, I'll go with a slightly different direction. I want to get back to this idea that we don't have enough money. Again, I'll focus on we have a spending problem, not the details of specific funds. I will say that the opposition, up until tonight, specifically, and if you go and look at all the literature, specifically said the only place we can take it from is the general fund. Now, after my last debate with Bob, now they're saying, well, you can take it from the general fund and the strategic investment improvement fund, SIF. So they acknowledge that, but they don't give SIF enough credit. I want to point out that in 2011, SIF started, the second general fund. It started with $249 million. The starting balance for 2023 is going to be $2.929 billion. Overall, our special fund spending was $790 million in 2009. It went up 453%. So when they say, oh, the special funds, that's just, we can't touch that. What they mean is, yes, the legislature made a bunch of laws on the pots of money they want those special funds to go. There are some exceptions, the constitutional ones, I'm not talking about that. There's only one way you get 453% increase, is by overspending regardless of the name of the fund.
Mr. Beckman,
Yeah, I just want to point out to Rick and everybody here, I'm opposed to measure 4 because I want to know what's going to happen. I don't want to vote for something and find out there's all kinds of unintended consequences. And I'm not getting answers about what those consequences might be. I'm not with the opposition. I've never talked to the opposition. I talked to Bob Harms, but this group that's opposed to it, I don't know them. I don't work for them. Nobody gave me any money to come up here and talk. I came because I could see some real problems with this, and I thought the public should know about it.
One last thing, special funds, this is a good example of why special funds aren't part of this conversation. Workers' comp, we all pay workers' comp premiums, that's a special fund agency. So your workers' comp premium goes to that agency, that's a special fund. Same with unemployment insurance, same with game and fish. If you pay a boat license or a hunting license, that goes to that agency, it's a user-funded agency. That's what a special fund agency is. So forget that number. It's not even part of this conversation. It's not available to us.
I haven't read over that. So included in the special funds that we can't touch that Bob is talking about, well, included in that is a $30 million transfer to the North Dakota Development Fund, which gives money to a private nonprofit group to give money to private businesses. It also includes $25 million for North Dakota tourism destination, things like Buffalo World in Jamestown. It also does, it's not $30 million, it's $95 million that went to it. It goes to a private business in Grand Forks to lease out space to other private businesses near the Air Force Base. It also gives $26 million to a private company for flying drones. It also gives hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for a new construction project for the 11 colleges we have in North Dakota, even though student enrollment has declined every single year for 13 years straight, and even though over 50% of our college students aren't even North Dakotans. I have pages and pages, folks. That's spending that you get from the special funds that supposedly we can't touch.
We'll go over here to the gentleman. I bet you thought you were going to die of old age, but you're up.
Yes, I know half our property tax goes to funding schools. We got a school land trust fund that's got $9 billion in it. How come we don't use that?
Rob or Bob?
Yeah, we do use it. It's just that it's in the Constitution, just like the proposal is here to put Measure 4 in the Constitution. In the Constitution right now is that trust fund is there, but the principal cannot be spent, only the earnings. So those earnings are going to public schools to fund them. But the only way you could spend the principal is if you had a constitutional amendment that allowed the spending of the principal.
Okay.
Dr. Becker.
Well, and I agree with Rod. Most of that money is tied up with the School Lands Trust and the Foundation Aid Stabilization. However, they can be used better. More money can be used from the Foundation Aid Stabilization than we have been. There's like another $250 million roughly that could be used and not go against the Constitution. But you bring up a good point. It is in the Constitution that the state is supposed to, whether you like it or not, it's supposed to be paying for K-12 education, period. And so when this measure passes, at that moment, the state will be paying, technically, 100% of K-12 education. My feeling is that the state should continue paying for 100% of it. And there's no loss of local control. The state used to pay 25% of K-12, and then 50, and then 70, and now it's about 80%. No one's complaining about loss of local control. Let the state do its job obligation according to the Constitution, which covers, you said 50%, for a lot of places, closer to 40%. But that would actually make those future increases that your locals need to raise, that would make those a lot less too. So that's the direction we should go.
I'll go to the center here. Mark, I know you'll agree with me. It should be ladies first.
I just think that horse was, how they say the cart before the horse. I think people need to know why it has to be locked in for that time and alternatives, where the other tax dollars are going to have to come from. Because the state of North Dakota cannot live forever on this the expenses that the monies they're spending. We're going to go broke.
And I think we've been around that question, but answered that to agree. Would you like to?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I have a little bit of a comment. There's a couple of things. The oil money is not going to be forever. I agree with you. Harold Hampton's is going to be around for 50 years, especially with enhanced oil recovery. Okay, so it's gonna be around decades, almost certainly. But no, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee it's gonna be there tomorrow. But it's likely going to be there for several decades. So we can take this opportunity. Yes, this measure relies on oil money if we don't raise other taxes. No disagreement there. We have been, in my opinion, squandering the opportunity for 15 years of this oil money. If we don't pass this, we continue having the drunken sailor spending from the legislature. Nothing really changes structurally in the state. When oil eventually goes away, we go back to North Dakota of the 1990s when we all would come around and talk about what can we do about out-migration and losing our young people. But if we pass this and become the first, and at least for a while, the only state in the nation with no property tax, we become a destination. We incentivize businesses to want to move to North Dakota. We incentivize young families to come to North Dakota because they can afford maybe the first house or at least more of a house. And when that happens, we get more of the economic diversification and the workforce development that the legislature, all legislators throughout the country have been trying and failing. That then insulates us. So now we have more industries. We're insulated from what might happen when oil goes away. Oil possibly going away down the road is a reason to do this.
Rod or Mike?
Well, oil is the reason not to do this. Because what we're talking about is taking $3.1 billion of essentially oil revenues and paying your property taxes with it. That's what this is. It's a tax shift. It's not a tax cut. I also want to go back to, if we can't find enough in that $7.4 billion of money, and where might, if we were all legislators and we were forced to find $3 billion for including that budget gap that Rod, if we were to find $4 billion out of $7 billion, and we're short a couple billion, what would we look to? Oil revenues. Oil revenues are going away. But let me give you some numbers as to what that means to this community. And these are our share of gross production taxes for this biennium. McKinsey County, 108 million. Dunn County, 77 million. Williams County, 88 million. Divide County, 8 million. Burke County, 6.5. Bowman. How about the cities in this area? This is the money that these communities are going to get in this biennium of oil money. Crosby, 2.3. Grenora, 1.7. Killdeer, 16 million. Newtown, 8.7. Ray, 5.6. Tioga, 16.6. Stanley, 7 million. Watford City, 33 million. Williston, 55 million. Those are real numbers that provide services to this community today. And that revenue stream is at risk if this measure passes.
Rebuttal. Dr. Becker.
That money is not at risk. That's more fear mongering. The folks up here, your local elected officials and lobbyists will tell you that the gross production tax and extraction tax are at risk of going away because in our century code, they're referred to as an in lieu of property tax. The Legislative Council, in fact, maybe some of you got my email today, sent out a mass email, and we also did a press release. Last week, the Legislative Council put out a memo clarifying and clearing up any confusion. Those taxes do not go away. They are not affected by the measure. There are several states in the nation that tax oil. About half of them use terminology in lieu of property tax. Others just say it's straight production or extraction tax. That's just words in the century code. There is no risk. That tack is to try and scare you. That's all it is. I'm not saying Bob is trying to scare you. I'm saying he's taking a talking point from people who have devised their talking points with many, many thousands of dollars on polling to come up with the language that will scare you the most.
One minute rebuttal.
I don't need a minute. 2 points. Rick is right, and I agree with him. This measure doesn't jeopardize gross production tax legally. I agree with that. Legislative Council told us that months ago. What I'm saying is if your legislators And you're looking for some way to fill this $4 billion budget hole that this measure produces 3, we've got another on top of it. But if you're legislators, and you have to find a couple $1 billion in this general fund of $7 billion, sit in the general fund dollars, where are you gonna look? Oil revenue. And the gross production tax numbers I just gave you are the monies that come back to those communities and those counties, and legislators are going to be looking for dollars to find. I'll give you 2 other quick numbers. Cass County has 33 legislators. Western North Dakota, from South Dakota to the Canadian border, excluding Dickinson, has 12. Who has the votes?
Okay, I'm a little mixed up here. I think we're over here. Mr. McGinn.
Dr. Becker talked about any monies needed locally, and I don't know whether it meant for building schools or different infrastructure needs and needs that we have locally, that those would just be accommodated by we'd have local discourse over it, and we'd be able to just raise those funds locally to provide those services and needs. What sort of revenue sources are you proposing that a local city or township or county would do in that? Would there be a separate income tax assessed by the county to pay for those, or what's your thoughts on where that money would come from?
Okay, so building schools is typically done with bonding, and that would continue. The opposition says bonding can't be done, or in other circumstances, I don't know these gentlemen, but generally speaking, they say you can't do bonding. Well, it turns out you can, but then they say, well, no, but the interest rate's going to be high, because they're trying to convince that we can't do general obligation bonds. We can. General obligation bond will still be done for school building construction. When we're looking at how do we raise the funds for the services that we need, property taxes very frequently comprise about 10 upwards to 20% of a city's total budget. So we have to make sure we get away that it's not the entire budget. But nevertheless, that full amount is being replaced in 2026. Because what's levied now gets paid in 2025. What would have been levied in 25 gets paid in 26. So everything that they are getting in 2025 is being replaced dollar for dollar by the state. It's the amount, that percentage they need above that amount. Let's say it's a 5%. So if let's just say their budget is $100,000, just to make it easy on me. Then, and let's say without this passing, they would have needed $105,000 from property tax. When this passes, that $100,000 is being replaced by the state, because all of the people in your community are going to keep their portion of that $100,000 in their pockets. The city then is going to be responsible for what their increased budget needs are, so 5%, so $5,000. Then they might say, well, here's the best way to do it. General government administration, public health, fire, law enforcement. Those are things that everyone benefits from, and what we're going to do is have and they can put it on, say, a water bill. In the country, or in the rural areas, they can put it on just a regular bill. It could be monthly, it could be annual. You do what you want. There are many ways to do it. I'm giving the time message here. I'd love to talk to you more about it. But it's only that small amount. So that $5,000 would be distributed to all the businesses, all the people that live in the community, because those are the ones that benefit.
Steve?
That question is directed to Dr. Becker. Would you like to respond to?
Well, the point I want to respond to, I thought the question was, what revenue source are you going to do to fund bonds for new buildings? If you need a new school, I thought that's what the question was. And I don't know if Rick answered it. What's the revenue source?
Well, that wasn't the question, but you bring up a good question that I can answer, actually. The general obligation bonds for the bond holders are all about the good faith and credit of the city. It's not like the bond holders, if they don't get paid back, they can't come take your property. It's the good faith and credit of the city. That's a general obligation bond. That means the city must pay it back by any means they have available to them. And sure, the most common thing is they say, oh, we're going to increase property tax.
But they can do it by any number of means, and it doesn't become a revenue bond if they say, well, we're going to do it by this source of revenue instead of a valuation-based property tax revenue. It can be any type of revenue. And it's still a general obligation bond because it's based on the full good faith and credit of the municipality.
The problem is you have to sell those bonds, and if you don't have a good revenue source to make the payments on it, you're not gonna have any buyers.
And the other thing is that the city, counties, they cannot do anything unless the legislature authorizes it. They're creatures of the state government, and they don't have that authority independently. They've got to go to the legislature and get that authority.
Thank you, gentlemen. We move over to John Deere Green.
Okay, first of all, taxes are a good thing when somebody else pays them. But here's my question with that. It all comes from different pots. I kind of understand a little bit of that. But sales tax in Williams County, Williston here, for instance, when a Montana resident comes over, they don't pay the sales tax. Can somebody explain to me why? And how many other taxes or special interest breaks are out there that we could capture that increases revenue?
Who wants to go first on that one?
The guys are discussing, so I'll go. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. There's all sorts of things. See, that's what elected officials do, is they try and get creative. They want to do good. These guys on the state legislature that I keep bashing, many of them are my friends. Some don't view me the same way. But they're trying to do good for North Dakota. That is the absolute truth. The problem is that so many elected officials think that doing good for your community or your state is by spending money somehow and giving breaks here and picking winners and losers there. That's not the right way to go about it. So property tax is the biggest game of picking winners and losers. Bob brought up earlier about all these big evil corporations. They're going to get breaks like Walmart. Oh, I have news for you. Walmart is the example of a corporation getting a property tax break for 10 or 15 years. I don't know, did you get a property tax break for 10 or 15? No, you didn't? Okay. So they're already getting a break. The idea that we would say no to ourselves and our kids and our grandkids and our friends and our neighbors, we don't want you to get a break because we don't want Walmart to get a break. I mean, that's nuts to me.
Rod or Bob? Well, the question I believe was that there was tax exemptions on the part of Montanans from coming over here. What other breaks are there and can those be eliminated and make it a larger pool of money to draw from the state?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but that's exactly, I think Rick and I and Rod would all agree that those are the kinds of exemptions that take place. And Rick and I agree on this as well. I thought it was absolutely nuts that Mandan would give Walmart a property tax abatement to locate in Mandan. One of the hottest, our economy in the state was one of the hottest in the nation. Minot did the same thing. Williston did the same thing for Menards. We're in agreement with that kind of craziness. I mean, I just don't think it makes any sense to give a company like Menards a property tax abatement so the rest of us pay property tax. I'm in agreement completely with that. But those are the kinds of things that we suggest is a better solution, looking at those exemptions and making a measured response to this problem as opposed to hitting our Constitution with a sledgehammer and putting this thing into our Constitution, which we may have a lot of difficulty fixing if Measure 2 passes.
Look at us becoming one big happy family up here. Lady in the center aisle.
Hi, my name's Missy. I'm in my 20s, so I actually moved to the opposite kind of section. But I haven't.
Because we're old, is that what you're saying?
No, I don't have a house yet. And I already have a big deal with property taxes. And I've seen the mismanagement that you speak of, we all know it, and I also seen the vindictiveness. I've seen North Dakotans get their whole land and property taken from them because they didn't pay their property tax. That is evil. So as a youth, going into buying, like wanting a home, my question to you is like, how do you take Measure 4 even further in eliminating property tax altogether for the people in the middle class and putting it on actual government or other private company corporations, Menards, Walmart, Halliburton that we discussed? And how do we pass on the burden onto the people who actually don't deserve the tax breaks? And how do we actually give real legacy to our children by actually giving them land and a home that can't be taken away from them?
Thank you. Rob or Bob, would you like to go first?
I'm not sure I heard or fully understand the question.
I'll take it. I'll take it, then you can have a chance to knock me down a little bit. So I love that you are here and interested and active and passionate. That's fantastic. This measure does make it easier for you to get into your first home because you won't have to have that $100, $200, $300 per month in escrow going to property tax. You can actually use that monthly money to pay a mortgage that is now more affordable. This measure, you say, what can we do to go beyond Measure 4? Here's what I truly believe Measure 4 does. It empowers you. It empowers the people. If the people in your community want to take it further, you now can, because they're going to tax you with something that's more transparent that you can understand and you can debate. If your township, you live rural, your township says, hey, we need to raise your taxes because gravel is so dang expensive now. That's a good discussion you should have. And most people are probably going to say, okay, I understand that. But when it gets rolled into a mill levy and rolled into taxable value and rolled into a big budget, and then there's all these elected officials that pretend they know how it works, how do you go up and defend yourself? You don't. And that's why I say before, other elected officials don't like this because you are in power. If the people in your community want to say no to a tax increase, this makes it much easier.
Well, yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. This measure, two things. One, everybody should keep in mind that the people that make the decisions that raise your property taxes are in this room, in this community. It's your park board members, your school board members, your city commissioners, and your county commissioners. The legislature didn't raise your property taxes. The governor didn't raise your property taxes. Your county commissioners, your school board members, your city commissioners, your park board members, they raised your property taxes. And I read in the paper that 80% of us didn't bother to vote for those people on June 11th. 80% of us did not vote for those people that raised your property taxes. Last comment. This measure does not make it easier for you to buy a home. It makes it more difficult. And here's why. If think about it. If you're Ted Turner or Bill Gates or somebody who wants to make an investment and not pay real estate taxes that you pay in California or Colorado or New Mexico, where are you going to go? North Dakota. We should make policies better for North Dakotans, not for people who want to come here for a tax haven that we've created unwittingly.
Rebuttal? So I agree with Bob. We need a more active citizenship to get out and vote in primaries. We need to do what we can. I don't know, it's a problem that the entire nation is facing. But I want to say, it's because of how faulty and problematic and screwed up valuation-based property tax is, his statement that your local officials raised your property tax is not necessarily true. Burley County did not increase their budget. They didn't increase their budget. And this is where I learned that local elected officials don't necessarily actually know how the mill levy works. And it's not just in Burley County, those are great guys. The railroads are paying less taxes because their valuation went down. The wind farms are paying less taxes because their valuation went down. I suspect your home's valuations went up. Agriculture, because we dropped off bumper crop years of 2013 and 14, agriculture land values, production values, and a 10-year average, take out the highest and lowest years, are down. That means this screwed up systems are paying less. That means someone else, the other people who aren't in those groups, have to make up the difference. And so, even though Burley County said we're going to do great for our citizens, we're not going to increase our budget. We don't want anyone to have increased property taxes. I got increased property taxes. We all got increased property taxes. It's a screwed up system. That's why we need to move away from it.
Thank you. We move on. We are looking at that 8 o'clock hour, so we will, as long as we have good questions, I think we'll stay right down. Go out. Let's go back here. Your call, which way? Okay.
Thank you for having this forum for the people tonight. I just have a couple of questions. You guys keep bringing up the Constitution, but do the legislators bother to read the Constitution so that they know what's in it? Because it says in that Article 10, Section 1, that they can't levy taxes on our private property, but they're doing it. So right there, they broke the Constitution, and they took an oath to that, okay? And the second thing was, why do you guys say that the county has to do what the state says? I believe the power comes people to the county to the state, not the state down. So people need to understand that we have the power, and we're supposed to be telling our county how to run, and we're supposed to tell the county to tell the state how to run it. It's that whole power of the lesser magistrates. And our counties aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, so we need to hold them accountable for that. So why are you telling people that the county has to listen to the state?
Bob and Russell first.
Two things. One, the state of North Dakota doesn't levy property taxes. So the Constitution, they're in compliance with the Constitution. The state does not levy property taxes. Counties, schools, parks, cities, they levy property taxes, number one. Number two, I lost my train of thought, Ron. Your other question was, the county, back to the people. So you're right, the people have the power, and the people pass the Constitution, and the Constitution is structured in a way that the legislature sets the policy for all of the rest of political subdivisions within the state. That's the way our Constitution, voted upon by the people, formed by the people. So the construct is people, Constitution. Constitution provides the legislature with the policy-making authority for our state. That includes counties, cities, townships, all the way down.
Dr. Becker.
Yeah, so I agree with your sentiment. The state does force a statewide mill levy though for the medical school. So there is that bit of consternation incongruity with the Constitution. But what the state does is it forces the hand. The people opposed to it call keep it local. It's the craziest thing because this actually makes it more local control if this passes. Because property tax is not local, it's one size fits all. There are pages and pages of restrictions in the Century Code forcing the locals to do whatever they must do to derive that revenue. And it incentivizes counties to keep their mill levies higher. Because part of what's tied to the mill levy is how much road funding, how much school funding you get. So if the counties were to say, you know what, we're doing good, we want to do right by our citizens, let's lower the valuations. Well, they can't do that. The state forces, they'll come in, and they have to many counties, I don't recall if it was Williams, but they've come into many counties saying you have to increase your valuations. So the state forces that. And so then the locals might say, well, let's take it easy then and we'll lower the mill levies. But then they're disincentivized because then they get lesser funding elsewhere. So it's this whole, again, it's a broken system. It needs to be thrown out, and we need to start over with a new system that's more transparent.
Okay, I believe we're over here now.
What is the current percentage of revenue that is generated from the Department of Mineral Resources, and is the state locking at that rate?
Dr. Becker? It's a good question. I don't know the answer to those.
Neither do I. Bob, Rod?
The question was Department of Mineral Resources? So, is it, or is it asking what's the oil production tax? Okay, because, yeah, it doesn't actually go to the Department of Mineral Resources. It goes to general fund and the SIF fund, and constitutionally, some of it goes to a water resources fund for water projects. Some of it goes to the Common Schools Trust Fund. But in total, I think it's about $5.5 billion in the biennium.
I think it might be closer to 7. I didn't understand the question.
A billion here, a billion there.
Is that rate locked? The state can raise it any point.
No, the revenue stream is about $5 billion for the two taxes, extraction tax and gross production tax. It's about $5 billion for the biennium. That tax is set by statute. So the legislature could increase it if they wanted. They spent decades trying to lower it.
Yeah, just to clarify, yeah, I may be including coal severance tax in that number too, but anyway, it's a big number. But you asked if they can change it. And so Bob said, no, they have to change it statutorily. Well, that's what the legislature does. So the answer to your question is yes, they can change it. And they have changed it. They changed it when I was there. It was 5.5, it was 6.5 and 5, and then now it's 5 and 5. So yes, they can change it.
Okay, the current biennium is $5.1 billion in total oil taxes.
Dr. Becker was referring to coal as well, which is a mineral, so we're under the same ballpark there. Okay, we're going to the center aisle there.
Thank you. First off, in defense of drunken sailors, I've been a drunken sailor, and when the money's gone, the spending stops. So I'd rather use the drunken legislature. I'm also an optimist. Harold Hamm wrote a very nice book called Game Changer. Gives a real good history lesson on oil and all the lies that have been told about oil in the United States and the world. And I would suggest that anybody that wants to know what's happening in the oil industry, read the book Game Changer. And I'm a mineral owner, and there's hardly a week goes by that I don't get offers to buy my minerals. So I know this oil is going to continue. At least that's where the smart money is. We're going to have more and more oil. So that legacy fund that is going to keep building, and it should be earning more interest all the time. So there's going to be more money available down the road. And you know, we just have to send it this, and I think that if we give people property tax relief, they're going to have more money in their pocket. They're going to be able to spend that money. And my question is, doesn't the legislature, the state government, aren't they the ones that are in charge of determining how the property tax is levied?
Rod or Bob?
Well, I would say, I don't know this for sure, but my understanding is the process is in statute, and the legislature determines that process. But at the local level, once a local government, whether it's a school or a county, once they get the valuation, they prepare their budget and then determine how much mill levy they need to assess to get enough dollars to fund their budget. So the process and the formula is determined at the legislative level, but the actual amount of tax is determined based on your city, your county, your school district involved in that district where your property is.
Dr. Becker. Good to go. Okay, we are back at the 8 o'clock hour. We'll take some more questions, but really, no statements. Let's have questions from here on out. If you have a question, fine. But otherwise, let's move along. Go ahead.
So did I understand from the state that the state does not levy a property tax?
Dr. Becker answered that in the affirmative in one instance, I believe.
There's a mill that's raised for the state medical school.
If they don't levy a property tax, how do they receive property tax?
The counties send it to the state, and then the state sends it back to all the counties to distribute amongst the political subdivisions. Correct, gentlemen?
Same thing for sales tax.
They don't keep any of it?
No.
Yeah, I could have swore I read something like in 2022, the state received $1.4 billion in property tax.
Got us there. Okay. Going for the hat trick here. Number 2. Over here. Sorry about that.
Thank you guys for being here tonight and doing this. This will be real quick. It seems to me that the evaluations on our homes going up is taxing us on an unrealized gain. And can somebody explain to me how that is not the case?
Oh, that is not what?
It's not the case. Yeah. So she's saying, yeah, if we don't think it is the case, it's absolutely the case. And I think that is a fantastic way to look at it because it's 100% true. I'm confident that the other gentleman will agree. It is a tax on unrealized gains, not unlike Kamala Harris's suggestion for how she wants to go forward with the economy in the future. Tax on unrealized gain in any circumstance is horrible. It's assuming that you have a greater ability to pay a tax or rent to the government because a property that you own has more value. That doesn't increase your ability unless you sell your house. So you are 100% correct. That's another aspect of why this is the valuation-based property tax is so wrong.
Wrong.
But here's the other half of that question. If your house goes up by 10%, that doesn't mean your property tax has to go up by 10%. It doesn't mean that. The mill levy, the park board, the school board, the city and county commissioners, they take advantage of that increase in valuation. That's the problem. Focus on school board members and county commissioners. That's the problem. Those are the guys that are raising your property taxes, not the legislators and not the governor. Well, let's stay with it, because you got lots of help.
Rod, anything to add? Dr. Becker, we're good? Okay. We're moving now.
When I received my evaluation, I don't have my paper in front of me, but I was given an opportunity to go first to the city's meeting that would address any increase in valuation. And then I would have an opportunity to go to the county level. And then if I had inclination and funds available, maybe I could go to the state to address my increased valuation. At the time that I went to the city meeting, I was told about an equalization board, committee, I don't know, but that it was the state mandating it's either 90 to 100% or 95 to 100% of similar properties. I mean, and you get really bogged down really quick. And so I would like to dispute some of the statements about the state doesn't do this. Well, the state has the power to go ahead and mandate these percentages in this very confusing, very, it's not necessarily unfair. I mean, we're all in the same boat, but it's a tax system that, like Mr. Becker had pointed out, some received less valuations, and then it has to be made up somewhere. So to me,
I've done about as much as I am able. I can't afford to go to the county meeting. I can't afford to go to the state meeting. And so that's why I'm sorry. Maybe other citizens are in the same boat, but that's part of the reason why Measure 4 is an attractive thing. And I know I've been very, very grateful to everybody on the stage who has been talking about things, who's been helping us to understand this more fully. I do appreciate every one of you. Is it Rod and Bob and my friend Steve and Dr. Becker? Thank you all so much.
There you go. And we have a final over here.
Okay, I got two questions. On that legacy fund, where does the interest come from? And where is the legacy money at?
Well, the legacy fund is built up by 30% of the oil revenues go into the fund. It's now about $11 billion. The state invested it and is earning, what do we say, 6%, but about 500 to 600 million in a biennium. Under that constitutional amendment, those dollars of earnings are to go to the general fund. The legislature's being a little loose with that language when they put it in its own fund or the SIF fund, but under that constitutional measure, those earnings go to the general fund.
And right now, those earnings for this biennium, $100 million for the biennium goes to pay for that bond issue for the flood control project in Vineland. So that's $100 million. There's a $225 million in earnings that goes towards property tax payments. There's $100 million that goes to the highways that we all drive on, and they reserved $59 million, 50-50, I forget what that breakdown is, but about $59 million hasn't been allocated, but that's where that $600 million is set to go for this biennium.
Well, and I'd like to point out, if I could, that yes, not all of it is being spent, but this last session, as I mentioned earlier, a good part of it is being spent. But what is it being spent on? Like Bob said, they're spending it on the highway department, for example. That's supposed to come out of the general fund. That's supposed to be their routine thing that they do, ongoing expenditures. That's not supposed to be legacy fund interest and earnings. Now, Bob would like it all to go back into the fund. I'm not disagreeing with that. But that's not what's happening. They are spending it, and the problem is they're spending it on things they don't need to. So if they stop doing that, and if we hold their feet to the fire on the stuff that they should be spending on, all of that money is freed up so that we keep what we're paying in property taxes in our pockets.
How do you get the interest off the legacy fund? Where's that money invested at?
Well, there's an investment board. They invest all over the place. There's consternation about China. That it turned out that we were investing with China. Now I believe, fully divested, meaning they're not doing that anymore. Then there's concern about whether we're investing in some of these, BlackRock, ESG, DEI, bullcrap places to invest in. And I think we're supposed to be pulling away from that, and there's supposed to be a little bit of favoritism, we'll say, to North Dakota businesses or businesses doing business in North Dakota, things like that. But yeah, there's an investment board that makes all the decisions.
Very good. All right, well, you know, I really appreciate the youth being here tonight. The young lady who spoke earlier, thank you very much. And I hope you understand that a lot of these people need to go to bed now. We're gonna wrap things up here tonight. That concludes tonight's forum and debate. A huge thank you for all of you being here tonight, taking your time. And a big thank you to Mr. Backman, Mr. Harms, Dr. Becker. Thank you all. Thank you all. Yes, I guess we will. But we're gonna wrap this up with a closing from each for 3 minutes. You're going first.
All right, I'll try and put this to bed quickly. So I've been saying all along that there are 3 reasons that I'm opposed to this measure. One is it freezes into our Constitution these numbers that every political subdivision passes for its budget in 2024. It creates inequities among spenders and savers. School boards that save money and manage money well, they'll be penalized. School boards or cities and counties that have been spendthrifts, they're going to be rewarded. Those budgets will be frozen. Secondly, in that inequity, I'll give you an example. White Earth hasn't levied a tax in 4 years, 2019 to 2013. No tax. They didn't levy one. They did for 2024. They're going to be rewarded for that forever until we change this Constitution, if it gets approved. Secondly, we're writing a check for $1 billion every 2 years to out-of-state companies who don't ask for property tax relief, whether it's Walmart, Menards, One-Oak. I'm going to give you a couple of numbers. Williams County, 65% of the property taxes paid in this county are paid by centrally assessed and commercial properties, most of which are out-of-state. McKinsey County, it's 85%. Montreal County, it's 47% of the property taxes paid are paid by companies who are headquartered in Tulsa and Denver and Houston. They're not here tonight. That's the second reason. Third reason, we cannot afford it. We've talked about that $7.4 billion that we have to work with. We got to figure out how to find $4 billion out of that 7. That's a tough challenge. I agree with Rick. A lot of the things that they spend money on, I do shake my head. But there's not $4 billion of swap in that $7 billion fund. And the last thing, that if we go down this road and we have to find that $3 billion plus the $1 billion on the budget gap, if we have to find that $4 billion and we fall short, our local governments right now that get that almost $1 billion of oil tax revenue, I read you those numbers. Legislators are going to be looking for the easiest way to find revenues to fill that hole. And oil revenue is going to be the easiest place for them to look. We can do better. Eliminate exemptions, review every exemption. Look at how we're doing valuation. I'm not a big fan of how we do valuations. And lastly, put a cap on property tax increases so that everybody in North Dakota says, we're going to have a property tax bill that goes up 2%, 2.5% annually. And then if the school board wants more, they can vote for more, but at least then we'll know what school board members that we can point to who want more than 2.5% taxes on our property. That's what I think is the better way to, back to Ed Schaefer, solve the problem. That would solve the problem. But this idea of putting this into our Constitution is bad policy for North Dakota.
20 seconds.
Yeah, I would just point out, as Bob did, there's not enough revenue there to make up this whole $4 billion shortfall. There's going to be some incomes, but a lot of it's going to have to come from tax increase. And my question is, do you trust the legislature that the new tax structure is going to be more fair than the old one? I don't.
Thank you, Dr. Becker.
All right, a couple of things real quick. Most of the big company in Williams here that Bob is talking about are pipelines. they will continue paying their taxes. They're going to be converted from the property taxes to in lieu of, so that not that it affects you. The second thing is, it's interesting. The Legislative Council says $2.45 billion. The Tax Commissioner says $3 billion. These guys are trying to tell you $4 billion. Here's the thing, folks. We have an opportunity ahead of us. What they have is envy. That's their argument. Fear and envy. The supporters have opportunity. What will you do with the property tax you are now paying that you get to keep every single year? Are you going to pay down debt? Are you going to help your kid go to college? Are you going to improve your house? Maybe you can afford a bigger house. Whatever it is, it's improving your lives and the lives of your children and grandchildren. Do not cave to fear and envy. We are better than that. Thank you.
There we go. All right, well, my apologies on kind of muddling up the closing comments here, but we got her done, gentlemen, so I don't do this for a living. I don't do anything for a living anymore. Anyway, I would also like to take one more moment for everybody here on your way out, sitting down, and please give a huge thank you to Mr. Jeff Nelson. He provides a first-class sound system in a building that is historically not very good for acoustics. So, let us leave here this evening knowing that the opportunities such as tonight are the ones well worth taking advantage of, because this is how it all works, and you being here tonight is why it all works. It was truly a pleasure to be with you all tonight. Good night, good health, good travels. The pool is officially closed.